Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Joanne Stevens, and this is our Thursday call-in show for mobile home park owners and investors and uh, financial people and vendors for the mobile home park business. In other words, all things mobile homes and mobile home parks. And we have a very special guest today, Mr. Gene Trowbridge, who is an attorney and who has a very special funding that he advises people on, and he's an attorney as well as involved in the financing. So he's going to give us some good, sound advice on how to raise capital for investment. Before I introduce Gene, I would like to remind everybody that in December 10th and 11th in Cedar Rapids, we are having an owners symposium. And at the symposium, we'll have an accountant and an attorney talk to us about capital gains taxes and estate planning. And we'll also have a couple of appraisers talk to us about trends that they're seeing in the marketplace for the pricing of mobile homes and parks. And if any attendee who brings some financials, we'll have a workshop and they'll leave the symposium with a pretty good idea of what their park is worth in today's market. So that's December 10th and 11th, and we'll be getting out more information about that. So without further ado, I want to introduce Gene Trowbridge, and Gene is the founding partner of Trowbridge Sidoti LLP. That's Gene's law practice, which concentrates on the syndication of commercial and investment real estate through both debt and equity. The partners in the firm have written offerings for more than $1 billion of money raised. The median offering size is $2 million, and his practice writes offerings under Rule 506B and 506C of Regulation D, Regulation A offerings, and small public offerings. As a former syndicator who for 10 years raised investor capital through the broker-dealer community, he is able to communicate with his clients on both the technical and the practical aspects of state and federal securities laws. As a longtime CCIM and CCIM senior instructor, Gene has won numerous awards for his teaching ability. His book, It's a Whole New Business, ! Is really a how-to manual on real estate syndication. You can find out more about Gene and his work in real estate syndication at his law firm's website, crowdfundinglawyers.net. And before we start the interview with Gene, Gene is also teaching this course in Chicago through the CCIM Educational Institute, and so that'll be at the Realtors Building in Chicago on Michigan Avenue. We're going to put a link on my website, JoanneMStevens.com, with a link so you can learn more about the course and register for the course. So that'll be in September, and the dates will be on the website. Just as a personal note, I've known Gene for a long time, and Gene, you were my very first instructor at my very first CCIM course in the 1980s, so I can attest to Gene being an excellent instructor, full of good practical advice about real estate investing and raising capital. So, hi, Gene, welcome.
Hi, Joanne. I guess what you can really attest to is that I'm getting pretty old. If I was teaching way back in.
You were like the the progeny. You were, I think you were 12.
Yeah,
when you were teaching that course.
That's for sure. Well, thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it. I will tell you that, that you may not know this, but the very first syndication I put together back in 1979 was a mobile home park out in Murrieta, California.
Oh my gosh, I did not know that.
It was an 86 unit park, and it was a senior park, and I ran it for about 2 years, and I wasn't cut out for the management of a seniors only. So I have great empathy with people who can manage mobile home parks. After 2 years, we sold it, and I went off to building self-storage units, is what I primarily syndicated in. But I remember those fond days of going out there and talking to the lovely people that were there, but it was a challenge.
The people are quite lovely, without a doubt. But as you stated, it is challenging, and we do have really terrific professional managers in this business and management companies. But that probably didn't exist back in 1979. I don't believe.
Well, no, I had to do it myself. So anyhow, that's my history there. But since then, I went on and syndicated a lot of projects, and then really in 1995, Joanne, I went to law school. I haven't been an attorney forever. As I was in my syndication career, I decided that I wouldn't probably do that forever. And so I was thinking about what would I do when I didn't want to take care of partners anymore. So I thought I'd go to and now that's what I do. I spend all of my legal time dealing with syndicators, crowdfunders, whatever, people who are raising money to make investments, mostly real estate, but almost any kind of investment.
I see. And so, Gene, I would think that would be a very good combination, with your background in syndication and then having a law degree. I mean, that would be the ideal, because it can be a bit of a minefield, I would think. Can you tell us when should people pool their money from other investors to buy a park?
Well, I always say that you should not do this at all if you have all the money you need to buy all the real estate you want yourself. Stay out of the business of taking in partners, managing their investment, managing their money, and getting involved in whatever happens in their life. So if you don't have So I guess the answer is, hey, if I need to buy a park and I don't have all the money to do it myself, and I see that it's a good idea, I'm going to have to go out and find some investors. That's where it all starts.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And interestingly enough, I am hearing, I would say, a few more investors saying they're maybe buying smaller properties or smaller deals because they just don't want to have partners. But on the other hand, if there's certain assets that one wants to acquire, and just going it alone is not an option. So tell us about crowdfunding.
All right. Well, crowdfunding is a hot word right now. Mm-hmm. It's really syndication, and syndication is nothing more than pooling investors. Some business purpose. We're all sorts of things in our life. We get involved in syndications. When you go to a movie, Joanne, and see at the beginning of the movie, Searchlight or Weinstein or all those companies, well, what they've done, they've syndicated their expertise, their management, and their money to make one movie. When you get on an airplane, really, you're syndicating. You don't own your own plane. You're not a pilot, so you and 150 of your closest friends pool your money to get some good equipment and get where you're going. So we do all sorts of things in life that are technically syndications. But the Jobs Act came in 2013 and brought the word crowdfunding to businesses. You know,
Okay.
the very first crowdfunding that we see here in the United States was way back when they were installing the Eiffel Tower. No, that's not it. The Statue of Liberty. When they were installing the Statue of Liberty, the country, from what I read, was about $120,000 short of being able to do that. So the radios and the newspapers in New York City asked people to contribute their dimes and their nickels and their dollars, and raised all the money to complete the installation. But the people weren't investing in anything where there was going to be a profit. They weren't going to get any money for it. It was what we call donative crowdfunding. It was a gift. And you still see that, and we saw that over many years. You might have heard of GoFundMe. People say, hey, I
Yes.
need to make money. Well, that type of crowdfunding has been going on for a long time. But until the Jobs Act, you really couldn't apply that process to raising money where people were expecting to get a profit and someone else was doing the work, because now we're talking about the securities laws. So I'll switch my wording. Sometimes I'll use the word syndication. Sometimes I'll use the word crowdfunding. We actually changed our website a year ago from syndication lawyers to crowdfunding lawyers, just to be more timely and more with it. Okay.
Sure. That makes sense. Do you think people have, generally speaking, have a pretty good understanding of what crowdfunding is when you get the call to get involved in their fund?
No, absolutely not. In fact, I'll use the word syndication with a client, and they'll say, no, I'm not syndicating, I'm crowdfunding. Well, okay, so you're crowdfunding. So how are we going to do this? And you know, the real issue is entering into the securities world. Because as I said, crowdfunding has been around, but only the legislation called the Jobs Act allowed us to take that approach in business. Because when simply a security, when you're selling a security, and this is important for everyone who's listening, pool investors. When you pool investors and you put them all inside of a common entity like an LLC or a limited partnership,
sure,
and they're doing it because they want a profit, because you suggested we can do this business and we can generate a profit, and then you've said to them, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. You have a security. And the 4 bullet points really to a security are, when there's an investment of money in a common enterprise, the investors expect a profit, but someone else is doing all the work. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about some of your listeners who want to buy another park. They don't have all the money, so they go out and find investors, but they tell the investors, you know, you can be passive, I'll take care of all this. Well, welcome to the securities world, and that's what my book is called. It's a whole new business, much more about securities laws than it is about real estate. We all know how to look at parks and manage parks and value real estate investments, but when we start taking other people's money, it just changes everything.
Sure, and that's and I think that's something that people generally don't understand, because when people are initially getting into the business, doesn't the money that they raise, if they don't have enough money to do it on their own, doesn't that generally come from friends and families?
Well, it might come from friends and families, and a lot of people will ask me, well, if I'm just raising money from friends and family, isn't there some exception for that? It's not really a security, is it? And in fact, there is no exception for raising money from friends and family. There's no exception if you're raising money just from one person and you tell them, you give me the money, this is how it's going to work, and I'll make sure that it happens. No, it's a security all the way along, and that's surprising to many people.
I'm sure it is surprising to many people. And so, so with the securities laws, I mean, how do you define a security? Is that when you just the act of having someone give you money to with the expectation that they're going to earn it's an investment that they're going to earn a return on, or how do you define a security?
Well, you hit it right there. It's the people invest money, and it comes into some sort of a common business approach, an LLC, a limited partnership, of course, a corporation, general partnership, anything like that. And the investors are there to make a profit. That's why they join. It's not just a gift. And you're the one who's running it. That's really what makes it a security and why there's so much regulation, because the investors are giving their money to someone else. Joanne, I often bring people back to the movie that we watch in and around Christmas time called It's a Wonderful Life.
Sure.
And Jimmy Stewart is standing behind the counter in his building and loan, and all the people are in there and they all want their money. And he says, you know, I don't have your money. Your money's in so-and-so's bar, it's in so-and-so's house, it's invested in someone else's business. But that doesn't stop them. They've got their little passbook and they want their money. Well, that's what a syndication is, or a crowdfunding event. They give the money, the control of the money at least to Joanne or Gene, and then we go out and buy a property and we run the property, but they think we have their money. We don't, but you know, we're responsible for it.
Well, it sounds like, just from the few minutes we've been talking here, Gene, it sounds like that raising money to buy parks or any kind of real estate investment is not a do-it-yourself project. That you really need good advice, a good advisor. So, what are some of the initial steps or things that people need to be thinking about before they go out and start raising money?
Well, let's talk about that. The issue is the securities laws in the country say, number one, that every security that's sold has to be registered with the SEC unless it's exempt. And that's where we all want to be. We all want to be in an exempt security. Mm-hmm. And as your introduction of me said, there are securities that are written under Rule 506. There's either a 506B or a 506C. And that is a rule in the securities law that says if you write your securities documents and you follow the rules under 506, you are exempt from full registration at the SEC. So that's where everyone wants to be. And I will tell you that last year, the figures that I've seen were that about $400 billion of money was raised for real estate syndications in our country, and 99% of it was raised in Rule 506. So now, I guess, to answer your question directly, we better find someone who knows how to write a document that complies with Rule 506, so you don't have to go through all the pain and agony and expense of registering your offering. And really what 506 is all about is a private placement. When the rule was originally written, you could go out and get investors and you could raise an unlimited amount of money, but you had to know the people before you started your offering. You had to have a relationship with them so that you knew they were interested in real estate estate, your type of real estate, that they knew enough about you that they might be interested in investing with you, and that you had spent some time with them. And somewhere along the line, they said something like, "Hey, Joanne, when you get an offering, give me a call. I want to hear about it."
Right.
That was the rule forever until the Jobs Act came along, and it's still the number one way that money is raised. And most of the people listening to us, when you do your first deal, they're going to go out and find people that they know. But
Sure.
in the Jobs Act, they created something called a split in 506, and it's called 506C. And basically what it says is, hey, you can raise all the money you want. You can advertise. You don't have to know the people. You don't have to have any relationship with them, but you can only raise money from accredited investors. We're going to advertise. It's not going to be private so much anymore. So to protect the investors, we better look to make sure that they have some financial well worth before they go ahead and make their investment. And that's what the Jobs Act did, and that's how crowdfunding became such a popular word, 506C. And now you go, Joanne, I know you've heard, and your listeners have heard of websites out there that are crowdfunding platforms with the word crowdfunding in their title, or crowd.
Sure.
Crowd Street, Crowd Fund, Realty Mogul, all those rich uncles, all those things that are out there are only out there because of the ability to advertise through the Jobs Act. But most of your people aren't going to do that. They're going to do their first deal, and they're going to raise money from 10 investors that they know. I mean, if you don't have a track record and it's your first deal, I don't think you're going to be able to write a clever enough ad to have people just mail you a check. What do you think?
Well, yes and no. I think right now, I think that there are certain investments, such as mobile home parks, that there may be some investors that would just take a bet like that. Those probably not too many, but I would say I would agree with you that not too many are just going to take a flyer with somebody that they don't know and don't know their track record.
Right. And there's about 4 questions that an investor asks that you really have to get by. The first question would be, Joanne, if you're going to put this fund together, I'd love to invest my $50,000, but what happens if something happens to you?
Right.
So
Sure.
You've got to have a plan for continuity, and that would be explained in the documents that the attorney would draft. And then the next question is, hey, have you done this before?
Sure.
So, all of us have had to answer no one time, but most of us could say, well, I haven't put a group together, but I've owned parks. I've managed parks. I've owned real estate. Well, that's good. That's a good start. And just get your first one done, and then you don't have to answer that question no anymore. Then they're going to ask you if you put any of your own money in there. Probably will. So that's good. And then the last question the investor will ask is, hey, if I put my money in and I need my money back, is there a liquidity provision? How does that work? And Joanne, you would tell them, well, we have documents that are professionally drafted with very good liquidity clauses, and we can help you with that.
Sure.
So you need an attorney to draft the documents to do 2 things. Number 1, make sure your offering is exempt, so you don't have to go through the regiment of getting SEC approval, and you have to make sure that the document is well drafted so it protects the investors.
Sure.
Raise $1 million, Joanne. You've got to make sure that the rules around that $1 million are solid, strong, so that the investors are protected.
Yes, and Gene, back in the we've in the 80s and 90s and even in the 2000s, and certainly with the financial crisis that started in 2008, but perhaps even there was for more or less a financial crisis in 1986 when the laws changed about recapture of the losses, which changed the taxation. To me, that was about as big of a crisis in commercial real estate as the 2008 financial crisis, when the financing more or less went away. But my question has to do with the syndicator. Weren't there many syndications, or did you see many syndications where the syndicator maybe didn't put any money or not very much money into the deal because they were going to operate the property, keep all the problems, all the day-to-day, all the decisions away from the investors?
Well, yes, that's true. Syndicator, one of the things the syndicator is offering, the sponsor is offering, is to allow the investors to be passive. People have other things to do with their lives, but they just don't have enough money to buy their own park, so they want to pool their assets with other investors and have a good sponsor on their side. No question about that. Today's marketplace, Joanne, you're not going to be successful in marketing and raising money if you don't have skin in the game. You've heard that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I don't know how much that is. I don't know if that's 5% of a deal or 10% of a deal. We write a lot of offering documents here and represent a lot of syndicators. And quite honestly, what I see is the people who make the most money in the transaction are the investors.
Ah.
The syndicator wants to be an investor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Make some money in fees. You get paid for your work, but the real people who make money and who make it first are the investors. So you want to put some money in there just like all the other people.
So if one of our listeners, and this call is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel for people to listen to after this call. So what questions should you talked about what the investors would ask the sponsor. What questions are there that the sponsor should be asking the investor?
Well, yes. One of the things in 506B, which is the way the laws always were, where you have to have a pre-existing relationship with your investor.
Mm-hmm.
We can take accredited investors and we can take sophisticated investors. We can't advertise. And so what the sponsor should be looking for is people who, number one, really know a little bit about investing. They know a little bit about business, and that the investment is suitable for them. That it's, this is not the last dime that's putting in this investment. If the investment is, let's say it's repositioning a park, and there isn't going to be any cash distribution for a year or two, well, you better make sure that the people who invest with you can go for that year or two without getting a cash distribution on the money that they've invested with you. Age of people is important, Joanne. Especially we can take IRA money into these syndications, into these crowdfunding offerings, and what we have with age is the requirement to start taking withdrawals or mandatory withdrawals from your IRA. So
sure.
You're going to park for 10 years. You think you're going to hold it for 10 years, and you're going to take a 70-year-old investor with their IRA. You better make sure that they have some money set aside, to handle those mandatory withdrawals. So there are just a number of things, and a good attorney will develop something called an offeree questionnaire.
Okay.
Questionnaire will be part of the subscription process, and people will fill it out, and the sponsor looks at it, and the sponsor has every right to say, no, this isn't the right investment for you, and reject the investor's money. Sure.
That sounds like an excellent idea for both parties. That it sounds like this this notion that it's a whole new investment world does built-in protections, or at least clarity for both sides.
Well, yes, and that's really driven to the issue of the securities laws. There are basically two laws that we still work under, a million little laws underneath there, but the first law is, are we giving the investor full disclosure? Do they know everything they need to know ahead of time so they can make an informed decision? And that law is what requires us to put everything in writing.
Sure.
Private placement memorandum, the offering circular, whatever you call it. And then the second law is, are we regulating the people who are selling these things? And there is a law out there that if you are going to sell a security of someone else's and get paid, you need a securities license. Well, we won't have to do that. Your listeners won't have to get a securities license.
Okay.
And the analogy is for sale by owner. In real estate, you can sell your own real estate without a license. You just can't sell mine.
Okay.
And so you can form your own LLC and create the interest to sell to your investors. And if you're doing it yourself, you don't need a license. It's called the issuer exemption, but it's basically for sale by owner.
Sure. I want to let our listeners know that if they have a question, we're getting towards the end of this show, and if you have a question for me, just simply hit *6 and you'll be unmuted and can ask your question. But Gene, I have a feeling that people listening to this show will have some questions afterwards, and so I meant to do this in the beginning, but let's have your contact information. I mean, you work on a nationwide basis, is that correct?
Yes, we do. This is federal securities laws, so we can work anywhere. Okay.
So, what is your website?
Crowdfundinglawyers.net. All one word, crowdfundinglawyers.net.
And Gene, how do people, if they want to read your book, which is an excellent book, and many successful investors have attended Gene's courses and also bought his book, and how do they obtain your book? It's a whole new world.
A whole new business, yes.
A whole new business.
They can buy it right at our website.
Okay. So I want to ask Gene another question or two, but at 1:40 the call ends promptly. It just so if you do have a question, just hit *6 to be unmuted. And but getting back to the questionnaire, it sounds like there's a better level of professionalism. Would you agree? From say the 80s and the 90s, when people were putting groups or syndications together to acquire investment real estate?
Yes, of course. The industry's come a long way.
And what else should if one of our listeners is thinking about putting a group together or raising money, what else should they be thinking about in addition to the offer or a questionnaire?
Well, I think what they should be thinking about is hiring an attorney at about the same time they sign the purchase and sale agreement. Some clients even sign up when the letter of intent is being finally negotiated, because it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks for us to get the paperwork to you, and then you're going to need 2 or 3 weeks to raise the money from your investors. So you should have, a 60-day closing, and you should be with your attorney at the very beginning of that 60 days. But you should always be talking to people who might be investors with you. Always tell them that this is something you might be doing. One-on-one is the best way to do it. And if they're interested in knowing more about it, have a meeting, have a call, explain to them what it is you want to do. Build that database of people with whom you have a pre-existing relation. Always marketing, always building your database.
For sure. And what are some of the problems that you've seen people get into, in the time that we have left? Does anything come to mind of any situations where people did get their partnership going in the wrong direction, or their syndication, or their group?
Oh, from the sponsor side,
Yes.
One of the things is not raising enough money up front to cover emergencies or whatever. Not giving yourself enough time to raise the money you need. Not guaranteeing anything. Certainly, you never guarantee anything. You just say if there's some cash, we can distribute it. And the last thing I'll say is the documents need to be simple enough so that the people who are going to invest understand what you're trying to do. Because if they don't understand it, they won't invest.
And Gene, do you think that there's more risk today in raising money, or forming these groups and raising money and being a security, because cap rates, generally speaking, have lowered, so prices are higher? And
Joanne, that's a real estate question. I don't think it makes any difference if I'm going to buy a property with 10 people or if I'm going to buy it myself. If we're at the height, and the only thing that's going to happen next is cap rates are going to start going up, won't make any difference if a group owns it or you own it individually. It's a real estate play, first of all, right?
It is.
So you have to know your real estate pretty good if you're going to be a sponsor.
You do, but I would think, and we just have in the couple minutes we have left, Gene, what advice would you have for a sponsor to raise additional money, or what to tell investors so that people are well aware that the future is there may be a little more risk because cap rates are lower?
Sure. Well, I think that's all in the documents. It's all in the private placement memorandum. A well-drafted document will explain all the risks to the investors. Their risk with the real estate, their risk with the government, and environmental and tax law changes. And so you put all that in there. And then one of the best things you can do is make sure that when you take an investor in, there's someone who understands actually what's going on. The smallest investor with the least education will be your biggest problem, Joanne.
That probably is very excellent advice. I think that's something we need to all keep in mind. The smallest investor with the least amount of experience and cash will be your biggest, how did you say it was, a problem, or just the person that will just need a lot of time or hand holding?
Well, I was trying to be polite, and I said they would be your biggest problem.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Well, we only have a minute or so left, so I want to remind people that on my website, joannemstevens.com, we will have a link under Save the Date for the course that Gene will be teaching in September in Chicago at the through the CCIM Institute, and that will be at the Realtors Building on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And what are the dates, Gene, for that course?
The dates are September 21st and 22nd. It's a Thursday, Friday. And it's a great course. We'll have 20 to 25 people and a lot of personal attention. Everyone will get their questions answered. And it's really designed for people who have done some exploration of this topic and are really ready to, let's do our first deal. I give you a plan on how to get your first deal done.
Okay, wow.
Great.
That sounds like an excellent course, and again, I can attest that Gene is an excellent instructor. And so, and keep in mind that our owner symposium is December 10th and 11th here in Cedar Rapids, so we'll have more information coming out about that. So, Gene, I want to thank you very much for being our guest. I think we could have talked for at least another hour about crowdfunding and sponsors and offer, the securities. But this has been very enlightening, so thank you for taking the time.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to talk to any of your listeners. There's no charge to call and ask me some questions. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you. Have happy Memorial Day weekend, everyone. We'll talk to everybody next week on the call. Bye.